Hello and welcome to this professional learning segment on co-planning. My name is Dr. Derek Riddle. I'm an assistant professor here at CSU-Stanislaus in the Department of Teacher Education. The threefold purpose of this training is first, to provide you with an understanding of the components of co-planning so that you may second, apply this framework to your own efforts at co-planning. And third and final, to self-assess your efficacy towards effective co-planning. I also would like to thank our partners at Cal Poly. Most of the ideas that will be discussed in this training are supported by the research done by our partners and friends there. Let's dive right in. Co-planning is one of three core components of the co-teaching model. Co-teaching is comprised of co-planning, co-instructing, and co-assessing. This particular training will focus on co-planning. There are 5 foci of co-planning. They are content, discourse, tone, stance of co-teachers, and productivity. We will spend the next few slides discussing each of these in more depth. Please feel free to refer to the rubric while we discuss these next few slides, as well as to stop the training when prompted or when needing to review the rubric. One of the things you should focus on while co-planning is content. Under this focus, there are subcomponents to concentrate on, namely, utilizing planning practices, discussing discipline-specific content, establishing co-instructing roles and responsibilities for the upcoming lesson, and discussing lesson logistics. To provide clarification on each of these subcomponents, let me provide an example of each. You may also refer to the rubric as well. However, please note that each planning session is unique, and these subcomponents are meant to provide guidance, not restrictions. So focusing on planning practices, you may ask yourself, what planning practice makes sense to use in this planning session? Maybe you're planning the whole unit and need to use backwards design, or maybe you need to plan the next lesson and need to be more focused on data from the prior lesson or on student needs. Planning practices help focus the co-planning session. It's also important to discuss discipline-specific content. Schulman refers to this as pedagogical content knowledge. You should discuss both what content needs to be taught as well as how it should be taught. Third, as co-planning is meant to prepare for teaching the next lesson sequence, you should also establish what roles each of you will play in the delivery of the lesson you are planning. Will you both teach? What will you each teach? How will you teach it and at what time? Finally, you should discuss lesson logistics or the procedural steps of the lesson. For example, will we have a warm-up? What will we do for the warm-up activity? Now at this point, feel free to stop and discuss these concepts together and to self-assess your understanding. When focusing on discourse, you should consider the following guiding questions regarding the type and amount of talking that occurs during the co-planning session and how efficacious it is towards preparing for the upcoming lesson. This discourse should provide professional learning for both the cooperating teacher as well as the teacher candidate. However, efficacy is important to consider when reflecting on these questions. For example, when asking, who does the talking, or who controls the talking or topic control, it's important to also follow up and ask, was it effective? Sometimes one co-teacher needs to talk more in order to create an effective lesson. As long as both parties feel they had opportunities to contribute in meaningful ways is what's important here. The same is true with the type and purpose of the talk. The context will determine the effectiveness of the co-planning session and of this subcomponent. There may be times when you have to inquire and ask more questions, whereas in other situations, you may need to make more statements. Finally, it's important that both co-teachers agree to the ideas and decisions made about the plan. Now feel free to stop and discuss these concepts together and to self-assess your understanding. While discourse drives the co-planning session, your body language and intonation communicate much more than what you say as to whether you are actively engaged in the co-planning session. That said, make sure to sit facing each other, close enough to hear and exchange discourse, and with an attitude that shows you are a willing participant. Not doing so may create a negative atmosphere during the co-planning session and result in ineffective instruction. Furthermore, the stance of the cooperating teacher and the teacher candidate is important in considering the effectiveness of the co-planning session. While at times, one person may take a more leading role, eventually you want to move towards being active collaborators in a mutually beneficial relationship. Now again, feel free to stop and discuss these concepts together and to self-assess your understanding. Finally, at the end of the co-planning session, you want to reflect on the productivity of the session. You may want to ask questions such as, how productive is the co-planning session, or was the co-planning session? Did the co-planning session meet our goals? Can both teachers summarize the plan and their roles in implementing that plan? Did we use the time efficiently? And are there any next steps we need to identify? To provide you an effective model of co-planning, myself and a colleague, Dr. John McFarland, filmed a portion of our co-planning session to highlight some of the criterion of co-planning. To provide you some context for the video you will see, Dr. McFarland and I were planning for our upcoming EDSS 3900 course, which is the Foundations of Secondary Education. We were specifically focused on how we might better teach the class session focused on the topic of the history of education, which is planned for the second week of the course. Our hope is that you will analyze and evaluate our exemplar in supporting your own efforts to co-plan effectively. Here is the video.
Well, I was going to say, I was just kind of looking through some of the material that we have for this class, and I just wanted to touch base with you on what you thought would work best for, on addressing how we can start doing the different parts of history.
Right.
So definitely we're going to come in and they'll start off with a quiz.
Right.
But I think you've also thought about maybe even doing the quiz in a different way. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, so I just thought, I want to make it all digital now, right? So that there is, like we talked about, the challenge is they haven't really learned this, they've only read it, right?
Yeah.
And now we're essentially holding them accountable for that knowledge.
Right.
Where this really could just be a check for understanding.
Yeah.
And then decide what we're going to teach throughout the rest of the class to strengthen things they've missed, right?
Right.
So if we do it digitally through Google, they use the Flubaroo that I talked about.
Okay.
I can get that data. I can publish it without necessarily publishing to specific students and embarrassing anybody that maybe didn't perform well, but just say, hey, overall, it looks like these are some questions of concerns we have on this
quiz. Do you
quiz.
think that you would actually give it to them after you've already done the lesson itself?
We could.
Okay.
I mean, that's might be a fun idea. Like have them take it as a pre and then at the post.
Okay.
But maybe change the questions. It puts a little bit more work in it that way. But
right. So what I was planning on doing is, because I'm using the platform of Canvas for the course, I would actually put the quiz on Canvas, have them do the readings in advance, and then also have them do the quiz digitally at home.
Okay.
And then they have
Post-class.
Free.
So, pre-class. Okay.
Yep. So they can actually, so it's kind of like, just based on.
So I think one challenge I'm having if we want to move in this direction is, I look through the TPEs, right? And the TPEs essentially says that they need to have an understanding of the content of history in California and how it affects their job, right? So I think overall in this class, I think the challenges, and I'm interested in your ideas, is how do we, not even how, but what do we teach about the history of education that's going to be relevant to their practical nature of teaching, right? So I struggle a little bit there in terms of what else. I mean, because we have that quadrant activity that we do. I think is a cool way to dive into things. Yeah. But what can we do more? So if we're just talking logistically, so you're saying 5 minutes. Do you want to do, or could we do a round robin where it's like, hey, you're going to be here for 5 minutes and you're going to go tackle this area for another 5 minutes? Or do we do, everybody has their section and then we do almost like a jigsaw where people are sharing out?
Okay, so one of my classes, they did one of the students' groups, they did a great activity where they had a poster, okay, and it was just the title. So maybe we could do one poster just had Latin grammar schools, and you give each group 5 minutes. They have resources there, they have based off of their readings, and they add to the poster like a round robin, and they go they go to each one. Okay. So they're all contributing.
Okay.
And it could be different things that they find.
Cool.
Which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
And then, you bring them back after 20 minutes or what have you, because I think it's like 4 groups. Yeah, about 4 groups. Yeah. Okay. And then you just kind of bring them all back, and then you have that discussion there.
Okay.
I think, and then everyone, however they, okay, that was my contribution. We found this.
Right.
And then that's where it can really lead to more in-depth discussions of what are we seeing now,
right,
in the development.
Cool. So then, I think that'd be good. And so this is the one that I always tackle, right? So like as educators, we're planning this, right, and we're planning we're trying to model essentially what planning looks like, but we're planning this, but like we're also wanting to obviously have some outcome, right?
Yes.
So I think the last thing is just what is our outcome ultimately from this course, from this particular class, not just the course,
right?
And how are we going to know that our students have arrived at that said outcome?
Well,